January 24th, 2003 was a day like any other. The birds were singing, there were ladies selling tacos on the street, and surely some kid in pajamas. He was finishing playing Wind Waker on his GameCube, Eminem was dominating the international charts with Lose Yourself, and the United States Department of Homeland Security was officially starting operations. But the most important thing that happened that day is that in the USA, the 55th episode of the third season of SpongeBob SquarePants, known as The Great Snail Race, premiered. This significant episode made history as the first time we saw Gary explode, taught us that Squidward's last name is not Tortellini, and showed us the crushing defeat of Squidward's and SpongeBob's snails at the hands of Rocky, Patrick's rock. Obviously, watching the episode makes it clear that the latter was just something funny or humorous. But indeed, several conspiracy theories I've read have made me take a second look at the episode. On top of that, a lot of people asked us to explain how a rock managed to enter the race, and why Chucha has teleportation powers. Well, it was time to make this video. And this definitely has nothing to do with our last video about Patrick's economic capabilities being the best performing video in the history of this channel. It has nothing to do with it at all. So to get started, we first need to clearly explain what happens in the episode. This episode begins with Squidward receiving a package in the mail, which turns out to be a small snail named Snelly, who according to Squidward is purebred and has a very high pedigree. Because of this, he plans to enter her in the Bikini Bottom snail race that Sunday. Bob initially doesn't plan to enter the race because Sunday is cleaning day, but when Squidward starts insulting Gary because of his breed, Bob gets offended and decides to enter. While all this is happening, Patrick is watching the conversation and he also decides to enter the race, saying that he will get a snail, enter it in the race, and beat Squidward. So what follows is the intense training of Gary, which doesn't go so well. Patrick arrives and shows his snail to SpongeBob, which turns out to be a rock named Rocky. SpongeBob tells him that it's not a snail, it's a rock, and Patrick responds that yes, it has nerves of steel. On the day of the race, Gary is exhausted and ends up crashing into some tires. Snelly goes to comfort him, deciding not to finish the race, and to everyone's surprise, Rocky reaches the finish line and wins the race, despite showing no signs of life at the start. So, how did Rocky make it to the finish line? Well, it's clear that we are given almost no information in the episode, so I decided to investigate if Rocky appeared in any other SpongeBob SquarePants episodes, and it turns out he does, but it doesn't help us at all. It appears in 3 other episodes as Patrick's pet, but it doesn't move or do anything, and only appears as part of jokes or funny events, like when Patrick wanted to donate Rocky to a time capsule, for example. After browsing through a few forums on the internet, I found something that many of you had probably already considered, which is a natural phenomenon known as sailing stones. This can mainly be found in a place known as Racetrack Playa in Death Valley, California, although it has also been observed in the Sahara. This is a geological phenomenon where rocks move on their own, without human or animal intervention, and leave long trails. The stones move only every 2 or 3 years, which makes the event even stranger. And it has even been observed that the stones can start their journey parallel to each other, and then one can veer off in any direction. There are even marks where you can see a rock moving backward. So looking over it, it seems like Rocky could be a stone that came from Racetrack Playa or something like that, but the situation is not that simple. Obviously, the theories about why this phenomenon occurs range from magic and mischievous spirits to very strong winds or the presence of mud, but in 2014 a definitive answer was provided. A group of scientists placed GPS on the rocks, set up time-lapse cameras in the area, and even installed a weather station with the aim of studying the phenomenon. Thus, after several days of collecting and analyzing data, they observed that the movement occurred when a thin layer of ice began to melt around noon and cracked with gentle winds. The remaining ice sheets, several meters in extent, floated and pushed several rocks at once at very low speeds. Their trajectories depended on the direction and speed of both the wind and the water flowing beneath the ice. So after seeing this explanation, it seems indeed unlikely that this could happen underwater. So I don't think Rocky's relationship with the moving stones goes beyond a reference that they move when no one is watching, and that's it. Therefore, we will have to look elsewhere. The other conspiracy theory that often circulates on internet forums is quite simple, but it hasn't been discussed as much as the first one. Patrick simply cheated. It is supposed that while everyone was watching the touching moment Gary and Snelly were having after the accident and all that, Patrick simply picked up Rocky and carried him to the finish line while everyone was distracted. So when everyone looked back, Rocky had won. And on top of that, this theory sounds stupid enough to be true, but I think it's not really exactly what we would call a well-founded theory. I mean, they were in a stadium full of spectators. Someone would definitely have noticed a star in shorts carrying a rock along the track. So I decided to review the race again and determine something else. Rocky didn't need to reach the finish line to win. You see, when Gary has his accident and gets badly injured, SpongeBob enters the track to attend to Gary, and the commentator mentions that this is an immediate disqualification, which means that at that moment, Gary had lost the competition. Well, when Snelly goes back to comfort Gary, Squidward is surprised and then walks over to SpongeBob to talk to him, entering the track to the scene, and then... Here, Squidward is automatically disqualified, so Rocky ultimately wins by default. So, it's a bit strange that Patrick carried Rocky to the finish line, because not only did he not need to, but everyone would have noticed and he would have been disqualified. All of this leaves us with only one option. As ridiculous as it sounds, Rocky can move by himself. Yes, it sounds stupid, but it's the only thing that makes sense. So, is it a magic rock or something like that? After thinking about this dilemma for a while, I realized something strange. Patrick was able to successfully enter Rocky in the race easily without any problems, and it is a snail race. It would be too strange to consider even for a moment that Rocky is actually a very rare type of snail. Indeed, actually. We see Patrick convinced that Rocky is a snail, and although it's evident that SpongeBob and Squidward think it's just a rock, Patrick registers Rocky as a competitor in a snail race. I researched snails for a very long time, much longer than I should have, in the hope of finding one that closely resembles a rock, hoping for a stroke of luck. But Mother Nature hasn't reached that level of pure creativity, or at least not with snails indeed. I found snails that camouflage themselves using the color of their mobile home, their shell, blending in with their surroundings, but never one that looks as convincingly like a rock as Rocky does. This complicates things for us. And to be honest, at this point I got pretty frustrated and started watching episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants. Because yes, after 1 hour, I reached the 5th episode, Pizza Delivery, and that's when everything suddenly made sense. But first, a bit of context. In this episode, Mr. Krabs decides that the Krusty Krab will deliver pizzas when he sees the potential to make money, and he sends Squidward and SpongeBob to deliver a pizza. They take a car, and SpongeBob is going to drive, but he panics and leaves it in full reverse for several minutes, draining the fuel tank and leaving them stranded on a road in the middle of nowhere. Now SpongeBob and Squidward must find a way to return to civilization and deliver the pizza. During his journey, SpongeBob spends his time doing silly things he learned from a movie about pioneers, like hitchhiking pioneer style and eating coral. But some of the things he saw in the movie turn out to be true, like putting your ear to the ground to hear movement from several kilometers away, or following the direction where moss grows to reach civilization. But Squidward doesn't pay attention and almost forces poor Bob to let him eat the pizza, when suddenly, Bob sees a rock and shouts excitedly that they are finally saved. It's much clearer in the English version because Squidward asks why he gets so excited if it's just a big stone, and Bob responds that it's not a stone, it's a rock. Bob explains that pioneers used to travel on those rocks for miles, and just as Squidward starts to tell him it's ridiculous, Bob runs him over with the rock at high speed. Both manage to return to Bikini Bottom and we have a happy ending, although the pizza delivery doesn't go as planned. So that gives us information that answers everything. In the world of SpongeBob SquarePants, there are rocks that move. Moreover, it is explained that they are rocks, not stones. And the name Rocky, which in English is rock with an extra letter, directly refers to this, knowing that rock means rock. In slightly clearer terms, it seems that in the SpongeBob SquarePants universe, a distinction is made between immobile stones and rocks that can move. So, I think it's quite likely that Rocky is one of these mobile rocks, but in a smaller version. In fact, I actually think this is somehow considered a type of snail, as it somehow managed to enter the race and seems to have a motor. Okay, yes, that last part might not make sense, but let me explain. While Gary explodes in the episode of The Great Snail Race, we can see that inside his shell there is a motor similar to those in real-world cars and in pizza delivery. When SpongeBob activates the rock, we can hear a motor. So, setting aside the bizarre fact that snails in Bikini Bottom have engines, not internal organs, everything points to Rocky being able to move. But here's the strange part. The rock that Bob used wasn't actually alive. He had to activate it somehow, in some way or another. So that indeed brings us to our conclusion in this video in Bikini Bottom. Those types of rocks are considered similar to snails because they have engines inside, but they are not alive as such. This is why Patrick says that Rocky absolutely has nerves of steel. His insides are literally made of steel. Additionally, we can infer that to win the race, Patrick must have activated it. And here's the craziest part, we see how he activates it when Patrick is comforting Rocky at the start of the race, telling him to start the race whenever he wants. He's probably starting the engine, but honestly, I really doubt Patrick has actually noticed any of that. Indeed. It's clear that he thought Rocky was a snail like any other, and we're obviously talking about Patrick, who isn't very intelligent. So I hope you enjoyed this video about rocks with engines that are actually snails. Give it a like if you did, and subscribe for more videos like this. I apologize for being absent these past few days. There have been several changes in my life, and I needed some time. But now we return to our regular programming, about once a week or so. Goodbye.